Hello and welcome to this video. Unfortunately, although I'm wearing a lav mic, I forgot to hit record on voice memos, and so the audio on this video is horrific. Thank you so much for understanding.
Oh, that's miserable. Okay. So mid-December, I'm on holiday break, right? I am at my sister's house. We're celebrating some festivities. During some downtime, I was on Instagram, just scrolling through, and my friend posted this series of messages from an Amazon employee talking about how they were made to deliver packages in undrivable conditions. This series of text messages, if you haven't seen it, is insane. There's just like no empathy within any of these messages. If anything were to happen to them, or if they were to get stuck, they're dead. So obviously this is very concerning. I'm reading this thread of messages, and I started to wonder, why isn't this guy a part of a union? I started asking like my family members, have you ever heard of like Amazon having a union? And we're all kind of like, oh, it's kind of young. But I looked it up. Amazon hasn't had a labor union since its founding in 1994. Please. There have been like a lot of union drives. There have been petitions to create unions, and there have even been union elections. But there's never been a successfully formed union, in the US at least. Of course there's some in Europe, but that makes sense with the European culture and European work culture overall. Maybe you're like me, and you haven't thought about unions in 5 years since your American government class. Let's give it a little refresher. A union is a collection of workers who organize to negotiate contracts with their employer. A standard of wages, working conditions, benefits, and in turn, the work that they're going to provide. Unions put protections in place for the worker from the employer. So how does a union actually start? There are about 7 essential steps to starting a union. And the first one is that you're going to need to generate interest. You're going to need to start speaking to your coworkers about the working conditions that you have in the workplace, about the wages, the benefits, and see if they're on the same page about needing improvement overall. The second step is talking to a union organizer. The weird thing about this step is that I can't find a lot of information about how to begin talking to a union organizer, or how deep you need to be in wanting to create a union to start speaking to a union organizer. I can't really explain anything about this step. You're gonna need to talk to a union organizer for more information about it. Third step, you start a committee. This is a group of coworkers who should feel really strongly about starting a union. The fourth step is to know your rights. I think it would be really beneficial if it was more common knowledge about what workplace rights in starting a union actually are. According to the National Labor Relations Act, it makes it illegal for employers to threaten, coerce, or interfere with employee organizations to start a union. I think that comment, interfere, is actually really important to this discussion because clearly Amazon is interfering. Step number 5. You're going to need to start getting signatures. Some of the places that I found said that you needed to get a majority of worker signatures. Other information I found just said that you need to get 30% of worker signatures. You sign to begin the process of starting a union, so it's really important to have traction. Step number 6 is voting. After these cards are submitted to the National Labor Relations Board, the board actually gets to decide who is eligible to vote. You need a majority of votes, like most elections. If you get to the 7th step, you have a union. So that's why step number 7 is contract creation. So it's a democratic process. You've now created essentially a political entity to negotiate with your company what you want. Clearly, the process of union organizing is a little bit complex. It takes traction, it takes influence, and it probably takes a lot of time. I think that the average minimum wage, especially American worker, isn't necessarily thinking about how to create a union or how to become a part of a union, because most minimum wage jobs are seen as something that's going to be temporary. If you're at a company with a high turnover rate, there's probably not going to be a lot of traction for a union anyways. But that kind of leads us to the question of what are the pros and cons of union organizing? And these are just a few, these just sweep the surface of the pros and cons, but I think some of the more important pros and cons are, first of all, the pros is that it creates worker protections from the employer. Another one is the promotion of living or better wages, better benefits, better working conditions, and it assures that that's actually going to happen. Some of the cons are that it's often harder to promote employees or terminate employees. What I've read is that often unions focus on seniority rather than expertise, so it can be harder to terminate a worker who's not doing a very good job just because that they've been with the company for a longer period of time. A second part of this con is that it can kind of be difficult to terminate those who are not performing at higher levels because they're still technically doing their job. Honestly, it kind of comes into question whether this is actually a con or not. And I think we'll get into this a little bit more later. The pros and cons of organizing a labor union can be different depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on. It's commonly assumed that many people who are more politically conservative hold values that align with capitalism, and I think a lot of conservatives believe that America is truly a meritocracy. I want to quote Jason Petty on this because I think he has a really good insight into America being a meritocracy. Okay. This is one of my favorite books of the year. It's called Terraform by Jason Petty, aka Propaganda. He's gonna pick on America because he's American, so chill out for a second. The American dream is, by definition, a meritocracy myth. It serves as the chief cornerstone of what it means to be an American. It means that you are the master of your own destiny. You have the freedom and liberty to chart your own course, and all it takes is hard work. Work hard, don't give up, and you will succeed. And maybe for the founding fathers, who are all wealthy white men, by the way, it was this way. Well, that all sounds nice, but any fifth grader knows it's ridiculous. We all know people who have risen to levels of success who aren't the smartest, or most competent, or most deserving to be there. We all know someone whose parents are rich or connected, which helped them get to that place of power. If it was just about working hard that will lead to success, then are you telling me that the guy outside cutting his lawn ain't working hard? The migrant farm worker, the immigrant house cleaner. I bet a bag of money based on the fact that you've got the time to read, those other folks probably work way harder than you, but you doing better than them. Meritocracy ain't even a real thing in life. This book is great. This book is so good, by the way. Okay. And to many leaning politically conservative, the idea that we live in a meritocracy would be a con to forming a labor union. So think about the fact that Amazon has notoriously bad labor practices, and yet they don't have any unions in the United States, despite many efforts. There's a lot of challenges to creating a union. It's a long and semi-arduous process. There's a high turnover rate at Amazon. Amazon is run by an individual who has very capitalistic values.
Hello, while I still think that Jeff Bezos has capitalistic values, I had another really interesting point that I couldn't add here because I was thinking about the wrong person.
Believe it or not, all of these challenges barely scratch the surface of the challenge it would be to create an Amazon labor union. Okay, I want you to hold those things in your mind because before we talk about those, I want to give you a little bit of insight into context on labor reform. One of the most infamous cases of labor reform starts at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, March 25th, 1911. Workers who are mainly women and immigrants in their teens and early 20s showed up to their likely 12-hour shift with no bathrooms and locked doors behind them to prevent pauses in production. They were all likely expecting their $6 pay at week's end. All of these working conditions, these wages, were normal. But what happened that day had dire consequences. 500 people were working that day, and a fire started. The water buckets provided for emergency were empty because the doors were locked, because there were tight hallways, and likely barricades. It was nearly impossible to escape. This tragedy led to the death of 147 workers. Back to 1909, at the Triangle Shirtless factory, workers had created a union. They were hoping for better hours, they were hoping for an increase in wages, but even though they were able to get some of those things, it was incredibly meager. The company was extremely hostile to the union. There were reports of workers being assaulted by people who were undercover, likely a part of the company, strikers who were arrested by police, and these women who were assaulted and harassed because they were a part of the union. It was nearly impossible for them to get any justice because the company was bribing police officers. Are we surprised? It makes us wonder, in these terrible, horrible working conditions, why isn't anybody doing anything? And the answer is probably because the people who were affected were immigrants and women. On the other hand, we look at Amazon.
You know when you have to switch the background to fit with the more modern era? While Amazon working conditions aren't 1911 level, it's still a company that's notoriously known for having poor labor practices. We know that there's productivity quotas, there's reported unsafe conditions. In some cases, there's not even enough time for employees to use the restroom. There's pay discrepancies, not to mention that Amazon has used virtue signaling to mitigate some of these complaints. For example, at one point, Amazon came out with Amazon, which as others have reported, it's pretty dystopian. So it brings us back to this question, why isn't anybody doing anything? And the answer to that question is that people are doing something. But in addition to all of the challenges to creating a labor union, Amazon is doing everything in its power to prevent labor unions from happening. One of the ways that Amazon does this is by spending money on union prevention. Now, this is not necessarily illegal, but do with that information what you will. Some of the ways that this money comes in is surveillance of employees' labor chat. Some would say that that's in good business practice to understand how your employees are feeling about the working conditions they're currently in. Another way this comes up is supposedly hiring employees to surveil and prevent labor union organizing. Now, this may or may not be true, but there was a job ad that Amazon put up at one point basically advertising that they were looking to hire someone who would be surveilling union talk. One of the other ways that this comes up, which is more obvious, is by surveilling email use. Duh, your company's going to do that. Is it ethical? Maybe not. Is it responsible? I don't know. Are they going to work through all of that information that you've given them? Maybe not. But if they have technology in place to surveil specific words like union, living wage, better working conditions, then there's probably a chance that you need to watch what you send over email. It's pretty clear that Amazon is legitimately spending money on these things. In the US overall, there's about $3,400 million spent annually on union avoidance. This can come in the form of anti-union consultants. There was one article that I read about Amazon that they're spending almost $10,000 a day, but I think this is based on speculative evidence that union avoidance consultants can charge up to $10,000 a day. But there's pretty reliable evidence that Amazon legitimately pays for union avoidance consulting. The second and majorly shocking way that Amazon avoids unions is through propaganda. And this is the video that kind of did me in when I was looking up Amazon and its anti-union practices. I've never, nor do I ever hope to work at Amazon, so this information is alleged. But there is a video that's reported to be used for Amazon employees that discusses Amazon's stance on unions. Now, Amazon says that they're not anti-union, but they're not neutral either, and this comment really got me. I think it sums it up pretty well. Either you're pro-union or you're lying. Among other things, the video includes urging employees to report discussions among employees that include phrases like living wage or steward. It also says to report potential organizing, associates out of character behavior, organizing with other employees that they haven't organized with before, or avoiding employees that they had been friends with in the past. All really, really fishy, really police state stuff. It explicitly says to immediately report this behavior to both your general manager and your manager. Now, it's been reported that this video has been taken down since then, but I think it's important to realize that labor laws state that it's an unfair labor practice for an employer to interfere with, restrain, or coerce employees in the exercise of rights guaranteed. So that video that's supposedly been deleted has some notable inferences of influencing employees against union organizing, notably spying, coercively asking employees about the support of union. So Amazon's doing some fishy stuff, but are we surprised? The last thing I wanted to bring up was union organizing in Alabama. Now, Alabama is pretty notoriously an anti-union state, but there have been union organizing attempts for Amazon in Alabama. In an article that I read, over 50 employees signed union support cards. But whenever this Alabama union has been voted for, it didn't go through. If over 50% of employees signed union support cards, why didn't the motion go through when it was time to vote? Maybe the employees who were eligible to vote got cold feet, or maybe there's something else going on. I don't know what will happen at the end of the year. I don't know if Amazon employees will ever be able to create a union. But as I was reading more and more about this, I realized that it's probably time for me to cancel my Amazon account. The payment's already gone through for the year. We'll see. I think one thing to mention is that a lot of us are guilty of supporting unfair labor practices, knowingly or not. But the more we learn, I think the more it's important to act on what we know and follow our morals. Based on what you know about Amazon, will you keep your Amazon Prime account? Do you think it's possible for Amazon workers to ever create a union? Let me know what you think. I hope this was interesting. I hope it was informative. And now I'm gonna go edit 50 minutes of footage.
Are you freaking kidding me?